It's Bigfoot Collectors Club with Bryce and Michael. I know a ghost story or two. Let's do this.
Yay!
Whoa,
Ooh,
a little flat on the brass there. Whoops, sorry, everybody. Horn section.
I was like,
you need to practice. Oh boy.
I was like, how did that turn into Rocky?
Because we are recording this episode the day of the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And as a child of Kansas City, my Kansas City Chiefs are for the first time in my life playing in the Super Bowl.
Is that right? First time ever in your life?
Yeah, it's been 50 years, dude, since they've ever played. They were at Super Bowl 1 and 2 and have not been back since.
Really?
Whoa.
Yeah, this is huge for Kansas City.
They're playing the 49ers, right?
They are. So by the time our listeners hear this, they'll know if I had an awesome day
Or a shitty day.
or if I went home sad. I want to talk all about it, but let's introduce the show. This is Bigfoot Collectors Club, the show where we talk to amazing guests about their personal paranormal history and share stories of high strangeness. I'm your host, Michael McMillan. With me always is your other host,
Bryce Johnson.
and our super producer,
Riley Bray.
And Bryce, why don't you bring in today's amazing guest?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's just jump right in. So our next guest and his critically acclaimed audio documentary podcast, Euphomet, explores the strange and our relationship to it. So it's right in the BCC wheelhouse. Now, the result is an intimate and fascinating look at how these encounters affect us on a personal and intimate level. He's quoted as saying, "We are in search of the other side, the thing under your bed, the signal of unknown origin, and the true stories behind the strange phenomena that are outside the sphere of popular consciousness." And he's also the founder of Defy Wrestling. Please welcome to the show, Jim Perry.
Hey!
Welcome, Jim.
Welcome
Thanks
to the show, Jim.
Thank you so much. I'm a fan of the show.
Dude, we're a fan of yours.
great
I
being
love
here.
Euphomet.
This is as comfortable as couch as I thought it would be just by listening.
There you go.
There's an ambience in here. An excitement is in the air.
Yep.
I'm excited for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Thank you.
50 years seems like hyperbole at this point.
This episode has a very short shelf life. They don't win. It's going to be a bummer. But it's funny. I wanted to talk to you, Jim. So you are this is an expert episode. This is an
It is.
expert episode of the show, which means we're going to kick it off in the normal fashion. But then in the second half of the show, instead of us going on about high strangeness, we're going to dig into the mind of our guest, Jim Perry, and get his insight into the world
Love it.
of the paranormal.
Great.
And then I'm going to run out and root for the Chiefs. But so I wanted to talk about this. I was actually thinking about this on the way over, and I want everyone's opinion here, and especially since we have a man who's familiar with the paranormal, the occult, the ufology, the esoteric. So shortly before we started recording, Bryce asked me, "Where are you going to watch the Super Bowl?" And the past 2 weekends, the past 2 weekends that the games have been going on, I should say, I've gone down to a local bar with a couple friends, and I watched the Chiefs win all the playoff games there.
Fun.
So of course, like, people are like throwing parties, and I've been invited to a couple, and I'm like, no, I have to go to the place where they won the last 2 games. And it's a little superstitious. I'm wearing the same hoodie and the same t-shirt underneath.
Oh, I see.
So here's the thing, and like a friend was texting me, and he's like, "Okay, so if we go there and they lose, it's your fault." And I'm like, no. If we don't go there
Right.
and they lose, then it's my fault. Because if I go there, I'm doing my job, which is showing up where I need to be to root for them on game day. Now, everybody has these types of traditions for their sports teams. But on the drive over here, I was thinking this might actually make sense. If you look at, not that I'm solely responsible, obviously.
No, I'm ahead of you. I'm following where you're going.
But what I'm talking about here is every time we're rooting for our team, we're sort of partaking in a grand occult ritual,
Total
right?
magic.
We are dressing ourselves in the colors of our team, sometimes painting our faces, sometimes dressing up as animals. And don't think of it as like, I have to be at the bar that I watched the last 2 games at, and if I'm not, I've ruined it. It's not that egocentric. I know that this is my role in the ritual, And everybody else needs to be doing their jobs in the ritual as well to summon a win. Does this make sense?
Absolutely.
I think we're onto something.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there's even spiritual precedent for that, right? You know, tribes, ancient communities, lost religions, or even religions of now, that their whole practice is setting up these rituals, you know, to enable something, the opportunity to manifest. And what you're discovering there is that within popular culture, the same exact shit occurs every day, but we don't call it the same thing.
Right.
You know, we're all involved in our own sort of fringe organized religions, but a lot of times we just call it fandom, right?
It's
Exactly.
so true. And who knows, with like all this collective belief, it could like manifest into like a missed pass or just like some key element in the game, you know? Who knows? It's fucking crazy.
I'm just saying I need to be where I need to be in my
You have to do
horn
your
section
job.
and
Right.
not be so flat on the harmonies.
But then it also could come down to that like hippo who predicts the game, who swims over to the Chiefs thing or to the Niners thing too.
Or it's all fixed.
Yeah,
the whole
right.
thing's rigged anyway, which is something that I kind of want to explore in a future episode is the conspiracies behind sports. But
my God.
we'll save that for another time.
Sure.
Jim, thank you so much for being here. Before we roll into our conversation with Jim, super producer Riley Bray, I'm looking at you because we have some
BCC news.
This is from a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure, actually, I think we might have texted this to one another. Jim, I'm sure you've heard about this, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it on the show yet.
Okay.
This is from The Guardian from a couple weeks ago. Scientists use stem cells from frogs to build first living robots.
Oh, yeah, I saw that headline.
Have you seen this?
No.
This is the first living robot that has ever truly been created.
Frogbot.
So be warned, if the rise of the robots comes to pass, the apocalypse may be a more squelchy affair than science fiction writers have prepared us for. Researchers in the U.S. have created the first living machines by assembling cells from African clawed frogs into tiny robots that move around under their own steam.
What?
One of the most successful creations has two stumpy legs that propel it along its chest. Another has a hole in the middle that researchers turned into a pouch so it could shimmy around with miniature payloads. These are entirely new life forms. They have never before existed on Earth, said Michael Levin, the director of the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. They are living, programmable organisms. And so the article goes on, they did this amazing, and it's, you know, science is a little over my head sometimes, but basically what they did was they ran
science.
Sort of an artificial intelligence program where they were basically learning how to train these organisms before they ever truly created them over months, you know, at a time, running these programs in a computer to see, all right, if we adjust this, basically creating a computer model as an example of a living animatic or an animatic for a living organism. And then when they finally got the computer program to evolve to a point where they think they had figured something out, they created it using this stem cells and frog DNA and then these biomechanics. I don't know. It's so crazy. So, their unique features mean that the future versions of the robots might be deployed to clean up microplastic pollution in oceans, locate and digest toxic materials, deliver drugs in the body, or remove plaque from artery walls, the scientists say. So these are tiny little... These are things that are going to fit in a fucking
awesome.
needle that you can inject into yourself. It's impossible to know what the applications will be for any new technology, so we can really only guess, said Joshua Bongard, a senior researcher on the team at the University of Vermont. The robots, which are less than 1 millimeter long, are designed by an evolutionary algorithm that runs on a supercomputer. The program starts by generating random 3D configurations of 500 to 1,000 skin and heart cells. Each design is then tested in a virtual environment to see, for example, how far it moves when the heart cells are set beating. The best performers are used to spawn more designs, which themselves are put in through their paces. So the computer ran like hundreds of generations before they finally perfected it. But this is amazing. this is the thing that I'm really fascinated by. This is the idea of the ethical question of this creation, which they are terming xenobots. They're calling these xenobots. So Thomas Douglas, a senior research fellow at the Oxford Euro Center. Oh, listen to this. I'm going to back up a little bit. The aim, Levin says, is to understand the software of life. If you think about birth defects, cancer, age-related diseases, all of these things could be solved if we knew how to make biological structures to have ultimate control over growth and form. Thomas Douglas, a senior research fellow at the Oxford Euro Center for Practical Ethics, said, there are interesting ethical questions about the moral status of these xenobots. At one point, would they become beings with interests that ought to be protected? I think they'd acquire moral significance only if they included neural tissue that enabled some kind of mental life, such as the ability to experience pain. But some are more liberal about moral status. They think that all living creatures have interests that should be given some moral consideration. For these people, difficult questions could arise about whether these xenobots should be classified as living creatures or machines. And they're talking about the evolution of these things could get to be, we could have mammals that are essentially hybrids of, we could have xenobot mammals that are walking around the size of dogs or cattle or even larger eventually, where we've created, now we have this like weird mix of, it's not even cyborg, you know what I mean? It's an all new life form.
It's the singularity, man.
It's coming.
Man.
And they also made, a couple days ago, they made little jellyfish that are cyborgs with little mechanical propellers.
You know, it reminds me of that quote by Marshall McLuhan, and I had to look it up. Man becomes, as it were, the sex organs of the machine world, as the bee of the plant world, enabling it to fecundate and to evolve ever new forms. The machine world reciprocates man's love by expediting his wishes and desires, namely in providing him wealth. So, in other words, our whole job here on as humans is to create AI technology. You know,
yeah.
It reminds me of a quote from Jurassic Park, which is life. Finds a way.
Life finds a way.
Also use frogs' DNA to clone dinosaurs.
Exactly. I was picturing Jeff Goldblum as that scientist.
The species of the frog is the Xenopus laevis, which is where they get the name Xenobots.
Xenopus.
What do you think, Jim? I mean, this is wild stuff. I mean, we're now really entering like science fiction.
Well, yeah, I mean,
universe.
There's so many science fiction stories that started right here, right? So many movies that started right here. You talk about Jurassic Park. What's really wild to think about is that this is now. What's going to happen with the technology, how it's evolving, the implementation of quantum computing, what's going to be possible about quantum computing when it's related to these type of experiments and this type of life creation. It makes you want to take a second look at like some of the quantum computing conspiracies that are out there in terms of its ability to perhaps open doors and create different lives.
So can you nutshell quantum computing
for
us and our listeners? I don't know if anybody can.
That's a no. Sure can't.
Now, I've heard you talk before. I think it was in an interview with Ryan Sprague on Somewhere in the Skies. You've spoken about CERN, and how it's sort of, and you've talked about how some science replicates sort of occult science in some form or another. Yeah. What do you mean by that? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Ooh,
I know this is a big question.
Yeah,
we're starting off
heavy,
strong, but
real quick. I think that in general, this is how I'll answer around this. I think in general there is there's a yearning for individuals who can't quite comprehend science and quantum science and technology.
As we all glance sheepishly around the room.
This room,
Bro,
right?
I comprehend just fine.
For these individuals to be able to create narratives about what is possible, what can be possible, and the implicit dangers that could be there, as all great fiction and fantasy like to tell us. What we're really trying to interpret perhaps is the hero's journey aspect of that. What does it mean for us? What's our relationship to it? And when there's something like a xenomorph or like these creatures that are so outside our realm of understanding, it starts to become a reflective diagnosis to the experiment, right? How does that thing reflect to us? And what is our role in that? In that way, we start to assume that, well, maybe our intent really is to be gods in all of this.
I'm on that.
It's either that
board.
or maybe we're just meant to be parasites.
Yeah.
Or
I like
maybe-
Can we be
gods.
both?
Or maybe we're meant to be destroyed by
Yeah.
the thing that we create.
All three.
Parasite gods. That's my new band's name.
Yeah. All
That's
right.
what we
Add
do
it to
here.
the list.
Add it to the list.
I mean, I get it.
Opening for BJ and the Shadow Bats, Parasite Gods.
I get excited by the thought of like, hey, maybe now we are at the point where we're going to create something that can actually clean up some of the mess that we've made. And I don't know if that's inexcusable or not, or excuse, you know what I mean? Like maybe we should have just not made the messes in the first place.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that like, hey man, let's get some of these little xenobots to go in and clean up the oceans and, help balance out our impact on the planet. Because I do think that regardless, we're all kind of looking for a savior in some form or another to come along and help us turn the ship around when it comes to planet Earth.
You know, but is it to turn the ship around or to keep moving forward? I mean, some ideas are like the Earth is just a placenta, and it's our job to use up the resources to push us out into the outer limits and to become a spacefaring people. You know, and then there's the others that say, hey, no, we need to reverse it and start moving backwards and create a sort of a symbiotic relationship.
Well,
with our
I think it's more.
environment.
I think it's look. I think Grant Morrison has said like all of this is nature. Don't fool yourself. Technology is also nature. It's
Exactly.
coming from us, but we are clearly imbalanced right now. That there's more negative output than positive output with arguably, at least when it comes to sustainability on this planet. So if we want to get off this Earth and expand, our time is running up, I think, in terms of getting there. So we need to come up with new technologies to help sort of offset the negative impact that we're putting, that our output is creating. Wouldn't you agree? I don't know. I mean, this is all...
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean that's the role of technology, right? I mean, it's cleaning up our messes and it's making us continue to propel forward,
Right.
to manifest destiny. Or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think we have to go back in time, but I'm saying we have to catch up with the way that we're moving forward. We have to have a more efficient system of moving forward so we don't fucking burn up in the process.
Yeah,
you
but
know?
as you
Agreed
can
there.
see, and it's clear to see, like cleaning up our mess always takes second seat to advancement.
But that's because of corporate greed, brother.
Yeah, man.
Fight the power.
Yeah.
I guess just the thing that you worry about, though, is that this thing that we've made to clean up our mess, as it gets smarter, does it just end up cleaning us up,
Yeah,
too?
because it's like, oh, well, they're making the mess,
Yeah.
so fuck these
These
guys.
Xenobots wake up and
I
they're like,
know.
you guys are done.
I know, it's true. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Jim Perry all about his personal paranormal history.
Sweet.
Love it.
Jim Perry.
This,
What is your...
That's what you get, man.
this segment's going to be much easier than trying to answer for quantum mechanics.
Great. You know what? We just got the tough stuff out of the way up front.
Xenopus.
What is your personal paranormal history? How did you get
interesting.
into all this stuff?
Well, when I was a little kid, I'd be sitting there, I'd be watching TV with my brother, and it was very common for my mom to walk across the room and answer the telephone before it ever rang. And on the other side of that phone would be my grandma. And we'd be at my grandma's, and the same thing would happen, conversely. And this was a typical daily thing, if not many times during the day. They seem to have such a psychic relationship, such a bond, that it was beyond any sort of twin magic. It was something that seemed so natural and inherent to a part of our human process. So what that did to me as a little kid, I think it placed me in, it suspended my disbelief in terms of what was actually possible, I think. And it just seemed normal at that point in time. Later, I discovered that, my family lineage includes a great-grandmother who was Native American who claimed herself to be a white witch. And within this, sort of family lore mythos, there was a passing down of inherent gifts that would happen generationally.
Pretty cool.
So, I mean, whether
Rad.
whether that's true, whether there is something to that, whether it is just family lore and mythos, like every one of us typically has, it's something that it created a space where I could explore alternative ideas, where I could have a table full of Sasquatch books, and would face no sort of opposition from my family members, because somewhere in there, someone has had an experience. My grandfather, he was a logger in the Pacific Northwest for most of his entire life. And he would come back with tall tales and stories about running into a Sasquatch family.
What?
And my grandparents, young kids, my grandpa took my grandma out in the logging roads, probably just for some wholesome good times, picking berries, perhaps, nothing weird. And, they have a story that they shared together often where their car was being pelted with pebbles and then rocks, and then a boulder started coming down. And, my grandfather got out to look, and he claims that a Sasquatch was on the ridgeline throwing stuff down at their vehicle.
Get out of here.
So whether any of this actually happened or not, and my family's just a bunch of bullshitters and storytellers, it didn't matter to me. And I think that moving through a space, non-judgmentally, and just accepting the stories for what they were and finding their connections to how they make us feel, always captivated me as a kid. It's why growing up, it's why I wanted to become a director, and it's why I wanted to act or something. And then it's why I wanted to communicate with graphic design and fall into the career that I did. It's telling stories. It's exploring these myths within ourselves and our lineage and our family and our communities that really always captivated me. So that was where I found myself for a very long time, and much like a lot of folks our age, right? You get to that space where you guys have entered in the space of doing a podcast about the paranormal. There were probably years before that where it was on the back of your mind, or you'd read the odd book every once in a while. But for the most part, career took front seat, relationships took front seat, and the mystical and the woo woo and take the back seat. I'm trying to get laid over here.
Right,
you know what I mean? And you're trying to go about your business.
You can sit in the back seat, you can watch, but you can't participate.
Right. So there's that period of your life until, for some of us, that legitimate falsehood of the cultural expectations of how we're to behave, how we're to operate, how we're supposed to move forward as a member of this sort of capitalistic community, they start to become at odds with our feeling that something else is there, and that, oh my God, did I forget that? And when you feel like you forgot something so implicit about yourself and your family and your lineage, you start to feel like you fucking failed them. And, as soon as I started feeling that, it was in the midst of a terrible time in my life where I was doing these, I had found myself a creative director at an ad agency doing these really high profile, super expensive, photo shoots and video shoots, and just feeling like it was all bullshit. And that the game was rigged, and why am I really a part of this? You start to feel a little of your soul leaving. I started to sort of self-medicate myself with the paranormal. I started going back and listening to old Art Bell episodes.
Wow.
I started reading books and researching into the phenomenon again, just to try to find myself in all of that construct that I found myself in at that time. And so I did that with the paranormal. I did that with pro wrestling. I was just trying to find myself again. I was trying to find that kid that was like, anything is possible and shit's cool. So I did that with those two objects, and that's what led to me creating a podcast. You know, thankfully I was in a career where I was already producing things. I know how to execute. So I was like, okay, well, why don't I just do that for myself? So I started doing the podcast, and I did that up until a certain point in time until I had to shift gears again, because the thing about any of this, and I'm sure you guys might agree or have had shared experiences, is that, you know, this phenomenon will present you an opportunity to stare into the abyss at some point in time.
Right.
Most definitely.
You know, Robert Anton Wilson calls it Chapel Perilous, right? So, you know, that occurred. I had that chance to look deep into the abyss, and it spun me out a little bit.
Can you talk about that experience? Do you mind sharing any of that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I don't even think I've really shared it on my own show before. But there was an opportunity to go out to this UFO ranch in eastern Washington State.
Awesome.
I was doing Euphomet. It was a talk format interview. I was doing it on the radio, actually, at that point in time, as a live broadcast. And I thought it'd be fun to take my brother and my redneck uncle who dabbles in the metaphysical.
Oh, that's great.
Once again, it runs in the family.
Yeah. Exactly.
Love a metaphysical
there.
redneck. That's
He
the
was
best.
there.
Great combo.
All of our characters on this podcast are actually metaphysical rednecks, so that's good.
It's a real thing. So we went out to this ranch, and this ranch is on private property. It's this guy, James Gilliland. You might be familiar. We were talking about him earlier. He speaks every year at Contact in the Desert. He has a place called ECETI Ranch. And it's, spitting distance from the Columbia River Gorge. It's in the foothills of Mount Adams, which is this, picturesque, majestic, volcanic mountain on the Cascade Mountain Range. And it's at this location where countless reports of light activity occurs, Sasquatch occurrences, some would even say contact happens, and researchers from all over the world, including government officials, every single, sort of hot topic paranormal author has been there and engaged with the place in some regard. And there seemed to consistently be at least a mythos around this place.
Yeah.
Something there to check out. So we went out there.
It sounds a lot like Skinwalker.
Yes. Skinwalker that is, attainable for folks to reach.
Gotcha.
There's actually a camping ground there. Like you can go online and reserve a space and just go camp. So it's
Friendly
interesting.
Skinwalker.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's very benevolent. It's a benevolent space, which is in terms of the expectations for Skinwalker, which is kind of dread and doom. And I was there 3 weeks ago. There's a contrast of energy, at least alleged energies between those spaces for sure.
And is there any lore to that area that dates back? Like, is this known? Like, Skinwalker Ranch is like in the path of the Skinwalkers. There's some benevolent mythology that's around this place, other than just it being an active area.
So there. Yes and no. There's nothing that is sort of based within the indigenous people in terms of that, except for its relationship, I think, to that chain of mountains.
Gotcha.
That Cascade Mountain chain with Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, Mount Shasta.
Comes up a lot on this show so often.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you well know, the Kenneth Arnold, UFO first. It all started over Mount Rainier over there in the Cascade Mountain
And
range.
Interestingly enough, his second sighting that he had while he was flying from Idaho over to investigate the Maury Island incident for Ray Palmer and Fade magazine happened near Mount Adams, closer to Mount Adams. And that first sighting with those 9 chevron was in between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, right there in the stretch between them.
Ape Canyon is over there,
absolutely.
in that area.
Yep.
And the stories of Bat Squatch are out of that area.
Yep.
There's
Michael,
all sorts of crazy stuff.
Don't ruin it with Bat Squatch.
It's
Sorry, Jim, go on.
I don't know where you draw the line sometimes. So you're heading out there with your metaphysical redneck uncle and your
and
brother.
my brother, who was helping me with the show at the time. And we were going out, we were like, no expectations. We're adults here. Like, we're not going to get, high, hopes for, making contact or whatever. Let's just experience it and take it for what it is. Well, we go there, and the first night we're seeing such immense unknown light activity in the sky that it's like a parody. It's almost like, is this like someone filming this? Is this like a prank show?
Wow.
Like Kevin Hart jumping out somewhere? Right. Like, what's going on here? It was to that level where it was like, well, we came to the conclusion that if this is in front of us and this is happening, what else is possible here? It's like a sort of an entryway.
Now, were these lights
world.
in the sky, or were these lights closer to the ground?
So here's what this anomalous light activity looks there. So these are lights in the sky in terms of what you would, accompany with unknown, sporadic moving lights, fast, slow, changing direction, taking crazy corners, a lot of them flying towards the mountain, a lot of them powering up. As this was going on, this was the first thing that we encountered there. James Gilliland comes out into this field, and it's called the Field of Dreams, and he'll sit there, and they have folks with apps going, essentially running to let you know what the known satellites are in the sky,
airline
what
traffic.
Constellation, airline traffic, and so they're monitoring that. They have special night vision goggles that you can look at these things with as well. And he comes out like some guru type character, and there's it's a kind of a strange scene because he's a normal guy and he's a nice man, but there's a level of paranormal groupieism that I think it can't be separated from some of these individuals. There's a lot of people there that are like, James, tell me what these are, and they're flocking to him.
Right.
And they're like middle-aged women, and they're like, please share with us the secrets of the world, And
I'm beginning to understand why he does this.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It can't be separated
It's
from
all
it.
adding up a little
It
bit.
can't be separated from it. So, very, very calmly, very unaffected, he starts explaining some of this phenomenon they typically see, and he starts saying, this is pretty common. This sort of light burst that happens. They'll power up, and they all heading to Mount Adams. He explains, and there's a portal in Mount Adams. He says, and if you keep watching, the mountain is going to start lighting up, and there'll be lights, at the foothills of the mountain speeding across where there's no traffic or humanity or anything. I'm like, okay, well, maybe he's onto something because of what we're seeing. And I'm standing there, and he goes, oh, I'm getting a strange sense that there's going to be a mothership that flies over the house here in I don't know, a few minutes, and then not 5 seconds later, this light that was stronger than anything that we had seen before, flies over the house.
What?
Now, we're not talking like this is a craft and I see it and it's defined, but this light that's within the proximity of somewhere far up there flies over and starts heading toward the mountain until it sort of disappears, and then it reappears, and then it heads in a different direction.
What color are these lights? Are they
usually
starlight?
amber? Yeah, kind of a star color or an amber color. And so this continued to happen until we turn around, and then the mountain starts generating lights.
What?
So these lights will start almost as if someone have seen like footage of Marfa lights. Something kind of similar, almost orb-like, right? They'll start generating and kind of pulsing, and then they'll go away, and it'll happen somewhere else, and then it'll go away, and it'll happen somewhere. And this is from the very top of the mountain, to the varied ridge lines, to the base of the mountain.
It almost sounds like you're describing like a Christmas tree, like it's lighting up like individual lights on a Christmas tree coming in and going
That's
out.
a great description. Yeah, it's almost like a giant Christmas tree.
Did you get a feeling more so than just being anomalous phenomena that they were somehow intelligently controlled or sentient, or was there a distinction between that?
There wasn't at that time during the night. At that time, it was just kind of like
strange lights.
It was strange that so many of the lights were heading towards and seemingly disappearing into Mount Adams. Now, the thing that I think about is like that's got to be air traffic going over the mountain. You immediately start kicking in these, I also had brought the knowledge with me that Mount Adams is actually a very popular destination for night hiking. Like hikers, climbers, they'll do that thing at night, which seems crazy to me. Like, what human would do that? But takes all kinds. But this was not. This wasn't that. These weren't headlamps, because the places that they were emerging just didn't. They weren't on a ridge line. They were up top. They were, and were some of them? Perhaps. Were all of them? Maybe. But what kind of one of the most startling things that started to occur was this third phase of lighting. And these were lights that would occur in the tree line area of the base of the mountain that would begin at one end and perhaps go all the way across at a speed that no vehicle, no human, no aircraft, no reflection, at a speed none of them could have gone. Just a beeline sort of straight across, and then it would kind of disappear, and then one would happen, and they'd go halfway, and then it would stop, and it would kind of just at the base of the mountain, there was all this sort of horizontal activity that would occur. So that was strange. But again, your head goes like, well, maybe there are reflections, or maybe there's like geophysical property that's, you're making this occur. Until my brother goes, hey, look at that light up there on the mountain is moving too. So I look up this light. It had been kind of like emerging. It's one of the Christmas tree lights, if you'd like to say. This thing drops hundreds of feet in no time at all, just like a pin dropping, and stops. So unless that was somebody dropping their headlamp or something,
right?
The speed of which it happened wouldn't even seem to correlate with the speed of gravity. It was so quick. So that was the first night, just seeing all of these lights, seeing all this activity in which, like, what is really happening here?
And what was your takeaway that night? You're talking to your uncle, your brother, like, what were you...
We just couldn't believe it, because considering we went in with no expectations, any of the expectations that we were harboring secretly inside or excitement were far exceeded. You go into these places, you guys have been to these haunted locations or these vaulted locations, and so often they don't really often produce actual phenomenon.
Right.
Sometimes there's evidence, sometimes there's anecdotal stories, sometimes even synchronicities occur that give you a sign that something else is going on, perhaps. But it's very rare that things actually pop up and go like, what the fuck?
Yeah, you plucked the thought right out of my head. I was
Yeah.
like, it's so crazy that you went someplace looking for something and actually saw it.
Yeah. So after a matter of time of just, sort of being in my apartment, broadcasting via this radio show, and being at that level of doing these interviews, all of that seemed at that point in time like I needed to be out there more. I needed to be trying to experience these things, not to try to understand them, but just to have like some sort of context or perspective in terms of what the phenomenon like is offering in different ways. And so that was like kind of my first takeaway. Of course, the three of us were like, well, I mean, I don't know, let's go to bed. Like, what are we doing here?
I just love how you said that, what it's offering in different ways. It's like, it's got a whole cornucopia of ways it can today you're going to get some lights, maybe tomorrow some Bigfoot activity. I've got plenty of things up my sleeve. It's strange.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit synchronistic that you mentioned tomorrow Bigfoot activity, because that's what occurred the next day. We went to bed with James Gilliland's stories in our head about what the place meant to him. And what it meant to him was a sacred space. He was presented with an opportunity to buy that land from the previous owner, knowing that it could possibly have been this spiritual space that he had been driven to through communication with extraterrestrials. And so like a lot of folks in the past or even now who, are preachers and have their own, I need to move to Alabama and start this church because God told me in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
He had a communication with some beings, he believes, that told him this was the place he needed to be in to breach contact and make contact with something else. So that's what the place meant to him. And then, in the following years, he had developed a relationship with, he believes, a myriad of actual different, varied alien communities or star families or beings. So when you're going through this place and you're going through some of the artwork on the walls, it's artworks of the Palladians and the Arturians and all these different alleged races of extraterrestrial beings. So if this place isn't already giving you this sort of overabundance of stimulation in terms of anomalous light activity, they're filling you with all these notions of, just talking about grays isn't enough here because let me tell you, they're not the only ones.
Right.
That's
the walls you're describing, this
concept
is like
there.
the house that you guys are staying in?
Yeah, so it's kind of a compound.
Right.
The place is a campground / compound. They have events there, so they have like a meeting hall. But
Jim, did you get seduced by a cult? Is this a cult?
They have these robes.
I mean, I'm not going to say no.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say no. I mean, with all due respect to him and everyone there, there is a sense with the folks that the volunteers, all right?
Okay.
Yes.
That work there. There is a sense of them looking for a place to belong.
Right.
And I think that if there is cult-like activity or behavior there, it is in the most gentlest sense, and that it's not mandated by anyone. But it is, these places do collect a interesting variety of individuals. Some of them perhaps looking for, at base level, some explanation to what has happened to them in their own life, but on a deeper level, those that have experienced trauma and are trying to find some resolution to it where typical means are not doing it. There's not a big difference between some of this and those that offer themselves to shamanic experiences and hike out into Peru, looking for medicinal treatments.
For sure.
So, there's a sweet and a sorrow to these places. There's an adventure that is there, but no matter how much anomalous light activity or Sasquatch prints and sightings, which happen the next day, I can never separate the humanity of these places from the phenomenon itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you mean by that? You separate the humanity from the phenomenon?
I believe that we're, whether we like it or not, we're co-creators or vessels of this stuff, I think. I get asked a lot on podcasts what I believe after going and being boots on the ground in all these different places. And I always say, well, I don't know what I believe, but even that was like kind of in question. And I think that even in question is that I am starting to develop some opinions, I guess, about what this could all mean. And I've done my best to separate myself from these ideas, A, to protect myself, because I'm also a vulnerable piece of this puzzle, I suppose. But B, I want to try to be the best sort of clear vessel to communicate the stories and the messages of the people I'm featuring, like you earlier today. I don't want to place any of my judgment or my constructs or my notions of things onto you. Mm-hmm. But as I go along, you can't help but separate yourself from just trying to find some understanding in it. And I think, if anything, I'm starting to really understand that, these hot spots that we go to find Sasquatch or, gray alien activity or fairies or what have you, cannot be separated by the individuals that are chasing, trying to discover, interpret what's there. Because just like a bunch of people wearing a Redskins jersey or Chiefs.
How dare you?
Sorry.
We're not that racist. Problematic, yes. But we're not that outright.
So just like a bunch of individuals wearing a
Chiefs.
sports team jersey, we'll say that, we all develop our own ways of communicating ourselves to be a part of a initiation, perhaps.
You asked me earlier, like, maybe what surprised me or if there's anything I learned on this podcast, and I think you hit right on it, that going through all these stories of high strangeness, most of them which I was not familiar with before, you run across this theme that there's a parlay happening, that the observer and the observed event commingle with each other, and it takes one in order for the other to happen. And I think you're absolutely right. Whatever this phenomena is, it needs us as a receiver to manifest itself or to show us the things that we think we're seeing. So it takes us, and I think there is definitely that human component to however this manifests itself, whether that's seeing a Sasquatch or contacting a UFO or seeing an alien or even poltergeist activity.
Well,
it runs itself through us.
Well, it's fascinating because as you're saying this, Bryce, I'm sitting here looking at you. I'm looking at the shelf over your shoulder, thinking about the name of this podcast. And, I think an example of that arguably could be whatever your connection to Bigfoot is, right? Because whether it's manifesting you in the phenomenon or you're manifesting it in your life,
right?
Like if you look back, I mean, you have a way stronger connection with Bigfoot than I do in terms of just the esoteric output that's happening around your orbit right now.
It would seem, yeah.
Willow Creek, the film you did with Bobcat, this podcast, now you're hosting a Bigfoot series.
It's a lot.
No, but I'm just saying it is sort of, Bigfoot has become a totem for you in your life for whatever reason. I might argue, and I think it's still loose, but I might argue that I might have a deeper connection to whatever extraterrestrial or UFO phenomenon is happening out there.
I would
You know
agree.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though that hasn't manifested
Yet.
in... God, please. That hasn't manifested in... Well, it's certainly not in this, like, large-scale mass culture way that it's forming for you, which is almost like witnessing a ritual become manifest in and of itself.
It's
right?
strange,
like,
for sure.
Somewhere along the line early on, you started a conversation with Bigfoot, and now that's echoed so loudly that like it's on people's TVs now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is wild,
Yeah. And we were talking about this even earlier. It seems, I don't want to use the word effortless, but it hasn't been an uphill battle.
No.
Those are the best paths.
I haven't been fighting
ones
it.
that flow
I've just
naturally.
been following the flow of it because I'm passionate about it. I'm intrigued by it, and it's not work for me.
It's what Joseph Campbell would say about following your bliss.
Yeah.
Like if you go through the door, that's your blissful door, like more and more doors open. And I'm paraphrasing him, but
No, totally. And listen, I've had to like kind of confront this. Like even speaking with my therapist, I'm kind of like, yeah, but acting's supposed to be my bliss, And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
maybe it's changing. Maybe it's a hairy wood
well,
ape.
and also maybe it goes.
No,
Yeah.
that's not my bliss.
Or maybe it just simply goes back to what Jim was saying earlier about being in a moment where you're in a career,
Yeah.
but getting back in touch with those things that grounded you or sparked your imagination
Yeah, man.
as a child and things that you had connection to all along. And I would argue that it's all, you're bringing it all together, in a really kind of fun, cool way.
Interesting.
At the end of the day, I think we're circling around this like fundamental question of like, does the universe need consciousness in order to exist?
Yes.
Like if something is not perceived, then can it exist? And so we always come back to this role of the perceiver and the paranormal. And
Yeah.
I think that's like the big question.
You're
Like,
on it, man.
why are
Consciousness
we-
is the big game, I think. Absolutely.
And where it gets really spooky is when you start factoring in the potential reflective nature
Right,
of the
yeah.
phenomenon.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that how much intent perhaps can deal with this.
Let's take a break on that thought there. That's a good cliffhanger. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Jim about what happened on day 2 with his Sasquatch encounter. All right, we're back. We're talking to Jim Perry about his experiences at the ECETI Ranch. So night 1, you see all these weird lights. And then you said the next day, what happened? This is all leading towards your experience with some form of Chapel Perilous, which we'll get into as well.
Yeah. The next day we woke up, and at this point, we had took our shirts off and made them into handkerchiefs around our necks, and we were seemingly wearing different glasses. We were, you could say, on the other side of something.
Wow.
Okay.
We had accepted that if this is the new reality, then we don't care anymore, and we're just going to just dip in.
Okay.
And
did you have any aid, any help?
Yeah, did you
getting
guys eat
there?
mushrooms?
no.
Is that what you're getting at here?
That's the funny
like.
thing is, it's because you don't need it.
Yeah.
Honestly, you don't need. I think that it's a good question, though, because I think that we had touched on this earlier today. I think a little bit is that sometimes the nature of this phenomenon is not too dissimilar from that of shamanic experiences with things like hallucinogens. There's something about it that becomes revelatory in a fundamental way. You can only hope to understand or explore, seemingly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you the idea of possibility, the idea of something else, and that, oh, hey, yeah, maybe you're a part of it sometimes, but maybe also you're not.
Yeah.
So you're in
Another-
that middle space.
Totally. I think another way to put it too is, magic mushrooms aren't the only road that leads there. There's other ways to get there too.
There's DMT, ayahuasca.
Yeah, or just focused attention.
mescaline.
Even stuff
LSD.
stuff outside agents. There's
just
also
kidding.
just focused attention, and for some tribes it's the beating of a drum or dancing or spinning,
Breathing.
breathing,
meditation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or mescaline.
Yeah.
Just
Or like rigorous jerk-off session.
Right. Yep.
Like becoming an edgelord.
Yeah.
That's how you talk to the aliens.
Ask Jack Parsons. Ask,
Yeah, right.
ask Crowley. Like, you're not wrong. He's not wrong.
Chapter 12, Edgelord.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, the great beast.
But you were saying.
Edgelord. Well, so after a rigorous session of edging, we went out into the field together, new people. And, the previous night, Gilland had mentioned that Sasquatch was a big part of that land, and that there were 2 distinct Sasquatch personalities, a mother and a son, I believe. And the son being smaller and more mischievous. They had a small apple orchard, and he would be seen sort of there. He would throw apples at people on occasion. People would step out of their yurt. They had yurts there. They'd step out of their yurt, and he'd just be standing there, sort of tempting them to not look away, So after the night previous, we were like, well, yeah, I mean, of course. Like, of course there's that, thinking like, well, let's just go explore the space, see what's going on, and just kind of reflect a little bit. It felt like something sacred was happening, and not being overly religious people, or even at that time deep into spiritualism at all. One of my best friends is a non-dual Kabbalist,
Right.
Timothy Rothschild. And he would say in that situation, hey, just explore. It probably doesn't have a meaning, even if it's something that seems meaningful. It is just it is what it is. So we kind of went with that approach until, my metaphysical redneck here, my uncle, he says, guys, I want to go explore this grove of trees in the middle of this field. I don't know why. I'm just kind of like, they're kind of calling to me. I'm like, hey, this is great. Like, he's having a calling. Like, this is awesome. So we went over to this patch of earth, and descending onto this small hill that gets to this grove, this outcrop of trees. It was kind of this sandy embankment, and within that, depressed, was what could only be described as the most classical Sasquatch print
No way.
I'd ever come across, not just in real life on social media or anything else. I've got a photo of it I'll share with you guys later.
Oh, yeah. We'd like to throw it up on the Instagram
Yeah,
if that's okay.
fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. So when we discovered that, it was almost as if we were now initiates into a game there. That we were playing with something else, and that it just gave us the next clue or the next insight. And, you know, to see that, we were excited, but also skeptical still because we're human beings. And I was like, what am I even doing in life? That started to approach, and we started to become more insular even after that moment. I think right at that moment, we were a group, and then we started to sort of split apart in some weird way. And as we walked back to the campground, two girls like come up to us, and they're laughing, they're joking, and they're like kind of like doing motions, and they're like looking like they're kind of apes and stuff. And we're like, what are you guys doing? You're having like too much fun over there. And they're like, oh, well, we were just talking, like we couldn't believe it. But as we were driving in here to set up camp, I swear we saw two Sasquatch. Just like right in the tree line. They weren't hiding. They weren't running. We drove past them like they were two vagrants or something, and they just kind of stood there. We're like, are you kidding me? Like, yeah, we saw them about, 15, 20 minutes ago, and we had just, my group had just come back from finding this print.
Wow.
And so if that wasn't enough, the night rolled on, and the same light activity occurred for the second night. And we were going to be leaving the next day. We were there for 3 days. And on the last day, needless to say, like within those days, they have all sorts of activities and events that you can partake in. There's a facsimile of the universe set in stones out in the field where you have the opportunity to go out there with someone who believes that they can channel a light language, which is like speaking in tongues, but aliens, and angelic beings and so forth. And you would do that with a guided meditation to find your star family.
Okay.
Yeah. So we didn't do any of that. It was already like, we get it. We don't need to go on the rides. Like, we totally
need to gild
just
the
see the
lily
vibe.
here.
Need to go on the rides.
So, I decided, we all decided before we left the space to just separate, go in our own directions for an entire afternoon, and just try to reflect on what happened here. Because mystics would say that would be a process of integration, right? We didn't have the words for it then, but we were looking for a way to try to process that. So I found a place in the middle of the field, looking towards the mountain. The sun was setting. It was a clear day. It was, that sort of brilliant Technicolor sort of sky where it's like you're wearing blue blocker sunglasses or something, right? Remember those? Mm-hmm. It's so radiant. And I'm like, you know what? I haven't meditated since I was forced to in theater school.
Wow.
So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to sit here in this space. I'm going to try to meditate, and I'm going to try to breathe, and I'm going to look towards the mountain with a soft gaze. And I'm just going to take this in and then go home and try to live life. So I sit there and I start going through the process, and I'm, doing this. I don't even know what it's called anymore, but I was doing this meditation where you focus on your spine, like burning, right?
Mm-hmm, sure.
And you're focusing on your breath, and you're keeping a soft gaze, and you're being very open. This was all a space that I was very vulnerable in. And even right now, talking about it, I feel weird, like talking about it for whatever reason. And I'm looking up into the mountain with this soft gaze when I notice that on an exhale, a light appears on the mountain very dimly. And so I kind of like, okay, focus. Like, yeah, you saw light. They're working up, but it has nothing to do with you. Just do your thing. Take a big, deep breath in. And I exhale out again. And the dim light, as I exhale, begins to grow in intensity. I breathe back in, and the light dims as I breathe in. So for the next 20 minutes, I sat there with this mountain, breathing in and out of this light as if it were a fucking ember.
Wow.
And I was seemingly in communication, whatever this light was, and was trying to tell me something, maybe. And after that night, I had to quit the show for a while. I just stopped.
Wow.
I couldn't do it. And it took a year. It took for other opportunities to present themselves for me to start getting into the space again. And I've never been able to go back to like a straight interview format. I've always had to do documentaries and find myself in these places, but focusing on the voices and the stories of others and how this phenomenon is reflective and speaks to them. Because I think on that day, it was reminding me who I really was. And that was someone that doesn't need to believe everything he experiences to feel it. And I think that was like a big lesson for me. I think I'll end some of this story with, I went back. So it was really big for me to like sort of tackle this again. And this time I brought my best friend, Tim Rothschild.
Wow.
And he came over from the East Coast. And he had to experience this himself, being someone that is a non-dual shamanic healer. He's a mystic that's on this path.
What does it mean to be non-dual? I've heard that before. So
non-dual is essentially a sort of a version of Kabbalist teachings that it's the process of including all.
Right.
You're not separating ego. Right. From it. It's inclusive. So what I actually dig about that, now I'm not one of them, to the chagrin of Tim, actually. But I like the idea that you're including the human experience in that spiritual quest, in whatever that is.
Sure.
You're not shutting it down. So that's, I think, why I can also relate to Tim, because he's at the heart of it, he's just a down-to-earth kind of guy while also participating in this high shamanic work. So it was really valuable for me to bring him out there with me this second time, just to be like, right? And of course, like we had our own, sort of vulnerable moments, and I've shared some of these on stuff, but I even had like a really embarrassing moment that taught me a little bit about belief. And where, I woke up in the middle of the night, we were in this yurt. I woke up because I caught like the glint of some light coming through the window. And it was a brilliant, radiant light. It was just piercing through the trees. And I got up and I go, holy fuck, what is that? And Tim's like, what are, as you wake someone up, they stir and they're like trying to get their balance. And he looks out the window immediately. What, the moon?
Yeah.
So it was like, oh shit, you know what I mean? But that was definitely a lesson.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Somewhere in there. But the most profound thing that happened when Tim and I went there for that second time was we participated in a table tipping ceremony they did there. And this table tipping ceremony, which if your listeners are attuned with that, is, American esoterica, dipping into the Eastern occult, would be a spirit divination technique where they basically use a table to rock back and forth to communicate and receive messages from angelic beings, extraterrestrials, dead loved ones, etc.
Wow.
So we were there as they were channeling these angelic beings. A very small room, very cavernous. There were other folks there. They were in it. They believed every second of it. They were there with all of their vulnerabilities, and there was about 4 or 5 of them. And one of them was a a really attractive woman, like probably her early 30s or late 20s. She was alone, and it was like something is out of place in this room. You know what I mean? You had a lot of the same type of individuals, and then you had her, and it was and she was really being moved by whatever was going on in that room, and she was she began to cry, and she was like just so connected to it, and it became a really heavy space, but one where it was like there's something else going on here. So later that night, it was Tim and I, Field of Dreams again. Not as much light activity on the mountain, but as much activity in the sky. And
wow.
We're reflecting in the other person that's out there in the field with us. Late, deep into the night was this girl. And, we're kind of like, what? So, what brought, why are you out in the middle of, the state, this weird ranch? She says, well, my husband was really into this stuff, and I never was, but he's not with me anymore. He recently passed away in an auto accident.
Wow.
And he'd always wanted to come out there, and he never got the chance to, and so she was doing it for him and having this deep sort of catharsis and or relationship to this place as a way to communicate with her dead husband.
Wow.
And I thought back to my experience out there changing my t-shirt into a handkerchief around my fucking neck and acting like a goofball and being like, well, I'm not judging, but like maybe I kind of am because I think I have to be some fucking stereotype to be out here. When there's other people that are deep, deep, deep in the throes of trauma or tragedy or life changes that are just looking for something they can hold on to that reflects back into who they are. And, I wasn't doing the show at that time. This was after, of course, my first experience there. But it was her that helped inspire me to start it again, but to find people like her that have had traumatic things happen in their life, or things they can't explain, or just the bullshit in life that equates to something else through the lens of the unknown and the strange and what we can't handle.
Man, that's so powerful. And it goes back to even that introduction, and what I love about what you do on Euphomet is so often we love to tell these stories and the details of high strangeness and what did the craft look like and what did the beings say, but we so often leave out like, well, how did that affect you and where you were in your life at that point? And I think we often forget or maybe even leave out that perhaps this is what this phenomenon is doing is and why it's manifesting to those in need. Perhaps there's something more on that level of a place of needed experience, and whatever it is that's accomplishing these strange things, maybe that's some of the reason why. It's strange to think about, but that's an attestament to what you do. That's a crazy story.
Jim, I wanted to ask you a question in that moment where you decided to take a break from doing the show, because oftentimes we hear stories where, and Bryce and I, this podcast, and I don't have to repeat the story, was kind of kicked off after a few months after an experience that I had where I was like, fuck, I really want to explore this stuff a little bit. So you used the phrase, Chapel Perilous.
Yeah, what is that?
And can you talk a little bit about that in that moment, why you chose to step back from this for a minute? And were you still exploring in your own way, even though you weren't doing the show?
Yeah. Interesting. Chapel Perilous, I think Robert Anton Wilson would describe it as that moment in time where you reach the unknown, when you're approached with something that you can't quite describe, and you seemingly have a choice, and that is to become a stark raving agnostic or a complete full tilt believer.
Huh.
And learning from that, I think that there's probably a middle ground. There's probably a more non-dual approach to that, dare I say. But it's also, this moment is also described as the darkest night of the soul. It's described as a spin out or a shattering in mystical communities, where essentially your old version or your current version, let's just say that, your current version of your place in reality perhaps is gone. And you have to make a choice about how you believe your own life operates and how you believe you operate in that life. This is the point where folks sometimes, even with different conditions, if you have someone that is maybe battling schizophrenia or other
psychoses.
Yeah, this is the point where sometimes they don't come back.
Yeah.
So, we're lucky. There's a privilege.
Yeah.
There's a privilege if we have a choice.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to describe there. And there's stakes involved. Because it is essentially at that moment, it feels as if you need to make a choice.
Well, it's so easy to say. And at that point, you have to decide in what you believe, and
right.
what is the nature of reality? Oh,
Yeah.
I could do. Yeah, well, no, that's a perilous precipice, and you have to. And on one side is something I think we all fear is just falling into that abyss of like, I'm gone now. My reality is shattered, and now I live in psychosis. Or there's the other side of, no, I'm just I won't believe any of it, And so it's walking that razor's edge.
And that's one of the toughest part of this job, I think. And Greg Newkirk and I, will discuss these events.
Greg
in
Newkirk,
detail.
Planet Weird,
Planet
Hellier.
Weird, Hellier.
Hellier, we've discussed on the show.
We decided, we were taking a long car ride from, I think, the middle of nowhere, West Virginia at some point in time. And we decided that perhaps the best approach really is 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Totally.
At all times.
That's what they say Bigfoot is. 1 foot in the physical world, 1 foot in the spiritual world.
That's
And
why
we
you
go
only
back to-
find one footprint in the sand.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the notion of liminal spaces, and that the veil somewhere in between. There's somewhere in between that veil that we talk about.
Yeah.
And that was what was so captivating to me about your story, was that listening to your story, and I think how your story developed as you told me, and it reflects what you were sort of mentioning about Bryce's story, is that seemingly there is this middle space that keeps reflecting in your life, and you're finding these places of liminality, and they're almost pulling you deeper into them, or reminding you in various ways, whether it's career-wise or anything else, that like, no, come back to the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably like some sort of a blessing or something.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's
I think so.
You can't go too far over here. When you do, it like kind of brings you back, and
Yeah.
there's something seemingly like really special about that.
Yeah. A blessing and a curse, like all good things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just don't go crazy, but
Yeah.
don't be boring either.
No doubt about it, for sure.
Well, those phone calls will persist as now that we're friends, and we're like these are phone calls that exist. Like,
Yeah.
hey, don't go crazy.
Yeah. No,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean? Like, take some steps back.
Absolutely.
Levity is so important in this sort of stuff, and that's why
Forward.
community in this stuff is so important.
I totally agree. 100%.
Unbelievably, we're reaching the end of a full-length episode already. But before we go, we have to play a game. Now that we've decided to keep feet in both worlds,
Yeah.
we got to play a game that we play with all of our guests before we say
boy.
goodbye.
All right.
And this is called Bull.
You say it during the cue.
I thought I say bullshit. Then
It's like, this is called
bullshit.
Or believe it.
We're never going to get it right. 102 episodes.
And why
All right.
should we?
So I'm going to go down a list of
It is
phenomena.
what it is at
differently
this point.
each time.
Yeah,
Oh,
man.
you're gonna make me like say I don't believe in things.
You're going to say
or believe them?
believe it or
no.
bullshit. All right?
Oh no!
And if it's somewhere in between, you still have to pick one of the words. Okay?
Okay.
You find out which side of your feet are on each of these. Okay? Here we go. Or I should say, which way your weight is leaning. Jim Perry, on your mark, get set, ghosts,
believe it,
UFOs,
believe it,
Bigfoot,
believe it,
alien greys,
believe it,
out of body experiences,
believe it.
demonic possession.
There's just so much context that's needed to be added to this.
Especially
Believe
we
it.
can
That's
circle.
the
We can
fun of
circle
the
back.
game.
The Bermuda Triangle,
Sure, believe it,
alien abductions,
believe it,
Loch Ness monster,
believe it,
time travel,
believe it,
Mothman,
believe it,
reincarnation,
believe it,
ESP,
believe it,
haunted houses,
believe it,
the Illuminati.
believe it.
There's a face on Mars.
Bullshit.
Skunk ape.
Believe it.
Heaven.
Believe it.
Hell.
Believe it.
Sea serpents.
Oh, believe it.
Poltergeists.
Believe it.
Chupacabra.
Bullshit.
Atlantis.
This game's hard.
I was just about to say, I'm very much enjoying watching you squirm.
It's only hard
I don't
because
know
you take
why.
it seriously.
Believe it.
Life on other planets.
Believe it.
Parallel dimensions.
Believe it.
The apocalypse.
Bullshit.
Life after death.
Believe it.
Well done,
Wow,
dude.
so
That's
well
pretty
done.
good.
Yeah, that's good.
Is that a lot of belief, though?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
It means you did great.
Let's circle back to demonic possession. Because you're
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think possession of some sort, for sure. Mm-hmm. There's something to that
like
phenomenon.
a literal entity entering your body and being like,
perhaps.
I'm going to take over for a while.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, perhaps. But a demon, I don't know
Right.
I can't clarify what a demon is. I don't
Right.
know what that energy is.
Or
right?
if it originates from the mind, or
Yeah.
I mean, because one would argue addiction is a type
Well,
of
you know,
demon, or
100%.
any type of obsessive thinking, or
Demon
obsessive
came from the
action.
word daemon, and Socrates called it his daemon, and that was just his. It's that inner voice.
Yeah.
Which is a strange thing.
So being involuntarily possessed, like 100%, where that
Yeah.
comes from, not sure, but there's something to that, and whether it's more metaphysical or something more based, but just qualifying as I don't know of demons. I'm
Got
not
it.
sure.
Cool. That's good.
Yeah.
You're doing pretty well then.
Yeah.
If you haven't encountered a demon,
Yeah, that's
he's
good.
thinking about it. He's like,
Yeah, I don't know.
I always like
don't
the
know.
ones that are like they say believe it in heaven and then don't believe it in hell. It's like you can't have both
Well,
ways.
Yeah, right.
But on this
right.
game, you can.
You can have whatever you
You can have
want.
whatever you want.
Jim, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
What a
I
pleasure.
mean, Jesus, I wish I didn't have to run off to now root for a sports team. Take place in an occult ritual.
There you go.
That's better.
Yeah.
Where can people find Euphomet? Where can people find you? Where in the woods can you be found, Jim Perry?
I don't know what woods I'm going to be in next time, but probably in upstate somewhere, looking for Sasquatch maybe.
Nice.
Actually, owls and synchronicities. That's what I'll be doing next, up
Great.
in the woods. They can just find everything at euphomet.com. It's EUPHOMET, and you can find me at all social platforms at It's Jim Perry.
Great. And the conversation you were referring to with you and Bryce, where can people find that?
They can find it at euphomet.com will be the best way to subscribe to the Euphomet podcast.
Okay.
It comes out typically this next season, which is going to be launched on February 14th.
Okay, great.
Starting with a feature on Ryan Burns at Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, nice.
And then deeper and deeper and deeper into the esoteric at
Yeah,
that
we
point.
didn't even get to your time on Skinwalker. We'll have to have you back.
Come back.
We'll listen to Euphomet and find out.
right.
Yeah.
Bryce, Riley, anything to plug?
This new Spindrift album's coming out soon on Alternative Tentacles.
Fantastic. We, of course, have our live show at the Bigfoot Lodge here in Los Angeles on Monday, February 17th at 7 p.m. Please come see us. It's a free show, ages 21 and up, because it is a venue that serves libations. Please go to Campfire or TeePublic, campfire.com/BigfootCollectorsClub to get all of our merchandise. And, of course, guys, we're running low on L files, so write to us with your personal paranormal history and stories at BigfootCollectorsClub@gmail.com, and we will read them on a future episode.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again to Jim.
Thank you.
I remain until next time, Michael McMillan for Bryce Johnson and Riley Bray. Until then, good night.
And go get regressed. Bigfoot Collectors Club is produced by Riley Bray. Our theme song is Come Alone by Suneaters, courtesy of Lotuspool Records. If you like the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the podcast to more listeners. To support the show, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Bigfoot Collectors Club and unlock multiple reward episodes every month.